remember questions.
Yes. The Republicans have promised that if they gain control of Congress, they're going to cut government spending. Will that lead us back and hurt the economy? And do deficits really matter? And should we concentrate about deficits when our economy is in such bad shape? Should we worry about the deficit when the economy gets better?
No. But let me repeat what you said. I mean, the Republicans basically, right now, with their Pledge of Allegiance to America, whatever that is called, today, what they are doing is really right out of Herbert Hoover and Andrew Mellon's playbook. I mean, they are basically saying, what we've got to do to get out of this economic crisis is we've got to balance the budget, we've got to cut government spending, we've got to reduce taxes, we've got to shrink government. But what we learned, I thought we had learned, and obviously we have to relearn it every time. And John Maynard Keynes and also Mariner Eccles taught us is that when you have the productive capacity of a nation up here at near full employment, but you only have enough demand to generate this much employment and this much capacity, when there's that much shortfall, government has got to step in, at least in the short term, and if that means deficit spending, fine. I mean, at the end of World War II, the debt-GDP ratio, the ratio of the debt to the national product, was 120%. I remember when I was a kid, growing up, my first economics lesson, I was 5 years old, it was 1951. My father said to me, and I remember this, he said, Bobby, you and your children and your children's children will be paying down the debt of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was not in favor of all of that. And I didn't know what debt was, but I had a hard time sleeping that night. Because I was a ghost in my room of a debt. But what happened to that debt? I mean, it's not as if yes, true, we got rid of World War II and that was over, but we went right into the Korean War, right into the Cold War. Our expenditures did not drop that much. But the denominator of that equation grew dramatically. So that the debt-GDP ratio actually got to a point where the debt was easily overcome. So by the time I was 20, I never even mentioned Roosevelt's debt. My children have never thought of it. I have a grandchild now who's 2. She has not once uttered Franklin D. Roosevelt's debt. So my father was fundamentally wrong about that. The only thing I think that he was ever really wrong about. So you're right. In the short term, the debt is not a problem. Now, there is a long-term problem. It's not so much debt, it's healthcare costs. That's driving Medicare, and it's going to drive us all nuts. Well, if the Republicans do what they threaten to do, we're going to have even a worse economy. I mean, this economy that's already anemic. I mean, 1.6 annualized growth in the second quarter. That means more unemployment, not less unemployment. If they actually do what they say they're going to do, this economy is going to go into a double dip. There is no question about it. In fact, even using the terminology double dip is not really accurate because for most people, we've never got out of the first dip. And it's not funny, but I understand. I don't, I am not saying this or I'm trying not to say this as a partisan. I'm trying to give it to you in kind of just plain economic logic as best I possibly can. But the point of this book is that it's not enough. That Keynesian demand, that kind of going into debt in the short term for the sake of long-term growth, is not enough. We still will not have long-term growth because even if we stimulate the economy and even if the Fed keeps interest rates at 0 or near 0, you still are going to, at the end of the day, going to have the torch cast on to consumers who are 70% of this economy, who have the wherewithal and the means to buy. And they're not going to be able to take that torch unless you restructure the economy.
Bob, why do you seem to be a voice crying in the wilderness, to use the phrase I'm sure you know? And do you see any signs of people in the administration or in Congress picking up on what you're saying?
They will when they read this book. No, I I want to emphasize, I am a big fan of Obama. I really think that he's a terrific president, and I am very concerned about midterm elections. I had dinner last night with a member of Congress from a Republican district, and she was elected. She's now into her third term, and she has worked feverishly for people in her district, and she's so wonderful. She's just the kind of public servant you want, and she is in danger. And there are people all over the country who are succumbing to the Tea Parties. I mean, to a kind of a frenzy that comes out of the anger, directly out of the anger that I think emerges from people who are frustrated and upset. By the way, you know where the Tea Party originally came from, and that was TARP, the big Wall Street bailout. That was the thing that tipped the scales. Americans we have gone through downturns before, but when we feel like the dice are loaded, the game is rigged, people get angry. And the Wall Street bailout generated huge anger, not only on the right, but also on the left. And it's still reversed. So I think that in answer to your question, why isn't Washington responding? Why aren't they thinking bigger? Why aren't the Democrats thinking bigger? Why aren't they putting together a narrative that explains to people where we've been, where we are, where we have to be going, that connects the dots? The answer is they're thinking tactically. Every battle is a little battle. They are just simply not in Washington, in the business, and I've been there, believe me, they're not in the business of portraying and seeing the big picture. The only president who has done that in recent memory is Ronald Reagan. And his picture was wrong. But it was a simple, clear idea that people understood. What we need to do, and what politicians need to do, is to describe for people in narrative form, very simply, clearly, what's happened, where we are, and where we need to go. Time for one more question. So let's have one of, yes. And I don't want to put any pressure on you, but this really needs to be a great question. You have to summarize everything that Now, you all have I don't want to insult you, but you have a look of students about you. Are you students?
Yeah. NYU freshmen.
NYU freshmen?
Well, two of us are seniors. Two of us are new.
Great. That's terrific. All right. Well, you're inheriting this mess. I don't care.
You spoke a lot about the stagnation in wages, and you spoke about the top 1%. And I was wondering what you thought about the idea that maybe the lack of social mobility is quite a key for instance.
The lack of social mobility follows very much from stagnant wages. That is, when wages stagnate, everybody kind of digs in and doesn't want to give anything up. And when everybody digs in and doesn't want to give everything up, you have a lot of resistance to social mobility. Some of it comes in the form of prejudice, like the stuff we're seeing now against people who might be undocumented workers, even though all of the data show there are fewer undocumented workers in America now than there were 3 or 4 years ago. But nevertheless, we have this huge uproar about undocumented workers and profiling and a lot of ugly stuff. We also have a problem with upward mobility because we are not, as a result of stagnant wages and stagnant earnings of the last 3 decades, we are not investing in public education. We're not, or early childhood education, which has been proven to be enormously effective, or public higher education. I don't know how you guys are affording going to NYU, but I'll tell you something. My students at Berkeley, a third of them are on Pell Grants, which means that they are quite poor. Their families are very poor. A third of them are from overseas. 2/3 of them have parents. Both parents were born abroad. They work like hell, but they are so laden with debt that their options when they graduate are very narrow. What I say in this book is we ought to have a different system in which anybody gets free public higher education, but what they have to agree to in order to get it. In other words, you don't have to get free public higher education. But you are eligible, anybody, for free public higher education if you agree that 10% of your earnings for the first 10 years of full-time work will go back into the fund that supports this program. So if you want to be let's say a perish the thought, an investment banker, or if you want to be a high-powered lawyer, or if you want to be a hedge fund manager, you can do that, but you are indirectly going to be subsidizing people who want to be maybe social workers, or maybe lawyers for the poor, or maybe journalists, or a lot of other people who now can't possibly do it because of the loan. So all of that is related to social mobility. I'm going to be signing books. I thank you so much for being here tonight.
Aftershock. We can make this aisle down the center here. And thank you for coming. Upcoming events are at strandbooks.com.